Okay, let's dive into a really fascinating and honestly, a kind of uncomfortable idea. This hidden connection between efficiency and fragility. It turns out that the very systems you've perfected to be fast and lean, well, they might just be the ones most likely to break. And right here, this is the paradox at the heart of what we're talking about. You see a sleek, optimized process, and you think, wow, that's smart. But what if that sleekness is actually a warning sign? So let's dig into that, shall we? Now, first things first, let's be super clear about something. Our obsession with efficiency, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. Things like just-in-time manufacturing became huge for really good, really sensible reasons. I mean, nobody intended to build fragile systems. And I mean, you can totally see why this became the gold standard, right? Less waste, better cash flow, operations are cleaner, costs are lower, deliveries faster. Seriously, who wouldn't want all of that? In a world that's stable and predictable, this isn't just efficient, it's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, but here's the catch. All of that brilliance is resting on a whole bunch of unspoken assumptions. It's built on the idea that suppliers will always deliver on time, that logistics will always work perfectly, and that any disruptions will be tiny little hiccups. And for a while, that can look like a genius move. Okay, so what happens when those cozy assumptions break? This is where that so-called intelligence, that optimization, can quietly start to curdle into fragility. And you often don't even see it happening until it's way too late. And this really changes how we should think about system failure. We tend to imagine some huge, loud, dramatic explosion where everything breaks all at once. But that's almost never how it works. Failure usually starts somewhere quiet, somewhere boring. Right. The thing that breaks is almost never the fancy, complex, high-tech centerpiece. Nope. It's a single, boring component. A supplier who's never, ever missed a shipment. A process step that's been exactly the same for 10 years. It's something so reliable, it's just become part of the background, invisible. And that brings us to this really crucial idea, unexamined dependence. It's this reliance that's so deep in the system's DNA, so taken for granted, that it never shows up on a risk assessment or a process map. It just lives in the, well, that's just how we do things zone. And that is exactly what makes it so incredibly dangerous. Okay, so if cutting every last bit of fat is the problem, what's the solution? Well, this gets us to a totally counterintuitive idea. The invisible work that buffers do, and how we've all been trained to see them as nothing more than waste. So, what do these buffers actually look like in the real world? Well, it's things like having a little extra stock on hand, or a few spare hours built into a schedule. It's having more than just one person who knows how a critical process works, or even having a backup supplier you hardly ever use. From a pure, hardcore efficiency mindset, every single one of these looks like waste, a cost to be eliminated. And that's because efficiency and buffers are basically playing two completely different games. Efficiency's goal is to make the system faster, but a buffer's goal? It's to make the system forgiving. They're there to absorb the shocks of the real world so the whole thing doesn't just shatter when reality hits. So this just completely flips our whole idea of waste on its head, doesn't it? That stuff we label as slack or unused capacity, it's not always wasted. Sometimes it's quietly doing risk management. It's actually a kind of prudence, you know, a quiet little investment in being resilient. All right, so this brings us to a really interesting pivot point. If the problem is these hidden dependencies, and the solution involves things like buffers, how in the world do you know where to look? Well, the answer isn't some new app or checklist. It's about changing how you pay attention. You know, a lot of us think of stuff like lean as just a box of tools, metrics, workshops, initiatives. But that's just the surface stuff. At its core, it's a way of seeing. It's about asking real questions like, where are people wasting effort? Where is the work way harder than it needs to be? And where do the same darn problems keep popping up, just in a new disguise? And getting this difference is absolutely critical. We're amazing at measuring lagging signals, things like late deliveries or missed targets. That's the stuff that's already happened. But the real magic? It's spotting the leading signals. These are the quiet little adaptations, the new workarounds people have to invent, the increasing number of exceptions to the rule, the little just-in-case checks that start creeping in. These are all signs that the system is under stress right now. And that's the big challenge, isn't it? You can't really put growing workarounds on a pie chart. You can't quantify a gut feeling that something's a bit off. These signals live in the hallways, in the side conversations, and how work actually gets done, not how the official process map says it's supposed to get done. Okay, so we're not going to wrap this up with a neat 5-step plan. That's not the point. The real takeaway here isn't a bunch of answers. It's a better set of questions. Questions that are worth holding on to as you look at your own world, your own systems. So let's start with this one. Think about that one boring, super reliable part of your workflow, the thing that's always just there. If it just vanished for a week, what else would grind to a halt? The ripple effect is often way, way bigger than we think. This next one is really about looking for those zero buffer zones. Where is your system walking a tightrope with absolutely no safety net? No room for a delay, a mistake, or just a simple human moment. Because that's a spot where efficiency has almost certainly become fragility. And this question, it pushes us to hunt for those leading signals we were just talking about. What are the new workarounds that people are doing now? The new checklists, the new habits? What little things have popped up just to keep things running that weren't there a year ago? Oh, this next one is subtle, but it is so, so important. We look at a good outcome, and we just assume the decision behind it was good. But was it? Or did you just get lucky? Was the process actually solid, or did a really risky bet just happen to pay off this one time? And finally, we've got the question that really pulls this whole thing together. As you've been chasing efficiency, trimming the fat, tightening up the margins, where have you accidentally traded away your ability to adapt? Where have you optimized your system for a world that maybe doesn't exist anymore, and in doing that, lost your ability to respond to the world that does? Now that's a question worth holding on to.